And as you can tell from the last two talks, it's still popular. However, for as much as people like to talk about DDoS, nobody really likes to talk about what you as an organization or what your organization clients can do if you're targeted by one. And there's very few resources that exist within the community or in the government that can help you figure out what to do if you are in fact targeted by a DDoS attack. So what I hope to do today is give you an idea of what you can do if you are targeted, or what you can tell your clients to do. And the only way that you can properly really defend yourself or take legal action in the future against this is by collecting proper information. Okay, so the United States Secret Service reports that less than 0.1% of DDoS attacks end in arrest. 0.1%. That's not a very good number. And you also have to take into consideration that this is only the number that is actually reported, which many DDoS attacks aren't even reported to the authorities. And this is also only the attacks which fall within the U.S. Secret Service's jurisdiction. Now, this number might not shock or scare a lot of you out there. Many people tend to think of DDoS as a non-serious crime that doesn't really have any victims, but it does. And so I want to run over some of the loss numbers with you just to prove, how this does really hurt companies. First example is one major U.S. corporation lost over $2 million in a 20-hour outage. And this is a corporation, too, that doesn't even depend on the internet for generation of its core revenue. An offshore gambling company lost an estimated $4 million in just 3 days. An online payment processor lost $4,000 in under 72 hours. And a Canadian-based online retailer lost $20,000 per day, and they had periodic downtime over 3 weeks. And just to quantify this, too, this is all in U.S. dollars. And so, I hope that these numbers, do impact you. This is quite a bit of money here that people are losing as a result of DDoS. And this doesn't even take into account, too, kind of the indirect losses from a DDoS attack, which are things like damage to the brand name, the money spent on bandwidth bills, or the money spent to actually mitigate the attack. Just to go back to the Canadian online retailer I just mentioned, they spent $16,000 in bandwidth bills, $55,000 on a hardware mitigation device, which ultimately failed for them. They spent over $10,000 on data center moves. They got kicked out of 3 different data centers due to the DDoS attack, because often when these attacks come in to a data center, they'll knock all the data center's clients offline, not just the client that they're targeting. They also spent $20,000 on their existing IT and security consultants, and then another $6,000 on another DDoS mitigation service, which failed too and didn't end up properly mitigating the attack. So now the question is, what can you do about this? Well, if somebody came in and stole this type of money from your company or extorted it, you could easily go to your local police station and tell them, and they would investigate it and arrest those responsible. However, if you go to your local police and tell them that you're under a DDoS attack, they're going to have no clue what it is. And even if you go to your local FBI field office and they happen to have a division of cybercrime, you're not going to get a response very fast, and when you do get one, it's kind of negligible how good it's going to be. And this is because cybercrime is a relatively new area for law enforcement, and it's not really staffed with knowledgeable people who can investigate these kinds of crimes. So the question is really now, how can you help yourself? And you can help yourself best by collecting basic information that you can give to the authorities to help them, and also this information will help you go to other knowledgeable resources on the internet and get help. So the first thing, obviously, that you have to do is get a packet capture. And the best source, of course, for this packet capture is the machine that's under attack. However, if the machine's under attack, it's probably not going to be available over the network, kind of a fun caveat. So what you hope for then is that you should either have the device on console, or you're going to need to get the information from an upstream device, a fiber tap, a mirror port, whatever. And you need to take this, your TCP dump, you need to remember a couple important options on this. Lowercase n, that's so TCP dump doesn't resolve the host names and you give yourself secondary DNS flood. You also need to use --lowercase s 0, that's to send the snap link to catch the entire length of the packet. And this is so you can look over the payload of the packet later. And you also need to use the --C option, so you can limit your dump file, your PCAP files to 5 megabytes or under. And the reason why you want to make them a smaller size is so that they're easier to open in like a protocol analyzed program like Ethereal or whatever you're using later. If you make them too big, it's going to be a problem. And when you first fall under attack, you want to take about 3 or 4 of these packet captures in about a 15-minute period. And for the duration of the attack, you should be taking a small packet capture about every 3 or 4 hours. And this is so you can just get a nice broad view of the attack and can determine if it has changed at any point in time also. So now what you're going to do from these packet captures is, playing back, you're going to want to determine the type of the attack, which is something I don't really have time to go over in this presentation. But if you can't figure out what type of attack it is, there's always people out there who can help you, so I suggest that you get help. The next thing you're going to want to do is obtain a complete list of source IP addresses as possible. Those source IP addresses sending you the malicious traffic, that's what comprises the botnet, obviously. And to do this, you're going to want to just generate like a larger, probably TCP dump plain text file. Then you can use awk or whatever other scripting fancy thing you want to get a list of addresses that go to the IP port combination that's under attack. You're also going to want to save any and all visual material related to the attack. That's all bandwidth graphs, flow data, packet per second graphs, just anything to demonstrate, kind of the size, the volume of the attack. And one of the most important pieces of information that people routinely overlook is any communication from the attacker. A lot of times even something as simple as like a chat log from a customer service where they're getting warning of the attack. A lot of times attackers like to go and threaten beforehand either by email or contacting someone in customer service. You need to save this because this can be really critical in identifying the attacker later. And also there's a point that I left off the slides here. And this is something you'll want to go to your management to get, and it's the actual loss figures, like how much this attack is costing you for downtime, either per hour or per day. And the reason why this is critical is that, at least in the US, I know it's a little different in the UK, it's under like the Computer Misuse Act. In the US, it's under Section 18 of some law, but you have to substantiate damages over $5,000. At least for any like hacking or DDoS attack, before you can take any legal action against whoever's doing it. So you need to have a way definitely to substantiate your losses. Okay, now all this sounds really easy to talk about, but it's not necessarily so easy to do. And what you need to do is you need to have a plan. If you or any of your clients come under a DDoS attack, it's a very stressful situation. You're going to be dealing with angry customers, you're going to have freaked out management, you're going to have stressed out engineers, and every company has to really come up with a plan that works for them. But I can give you kind of some pointers of how to put one together. You need to have like a point person or team already pre-designated to collect the information that I've just mentioned on a DDoS attack. You need to have a point person or team assigned to deal with the customer calls, because there's going to be a lot of them. You need to have a pre-prepared statement to give to your customers or business partners, because a lot of companies don't like to actively acknowledge that they've come under DDoS. That's something you need to decide beforehand. And yeah, I think that's about it. Also, for you or any of your clients, good monitoring doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to have like an Arbor box. You can easily put a fiber or a Gigi card into a little 1U rack mount box, and you can mirror traffic off of a border router. Good good note for this is that you're going to want to limit it to 100, rate limit it to 100 megabits a second or lower. Anything more than that, and you get a lot of traffic in, it's probably going to kill the box if you try to run TCP dump on it. So you don't necessarily have to get all the traffic. You just want to get a good sampling of it. The other thing is too is that graphing is obviously something that is one of the first things deployed and set up in a network, but a large attack can often knock all your graphing systems offline. But remember that you can always retrieve this data from an upstream provider. All you have to do is ask and be nice. They'll give it to you. Okay, so now the next step that we're going to take here is, like, you've already got your basic information. You might be asking, why can't I just go give this to the FBI now and walk away? Well, you can, but they're not going to move very fast. And if your site or your client site is still down, you might as well go the extra mile, because a lot of times if you provide your law enforcement with extra data, they'll make that much more, I mean, your case looks that much better, and they're much more willing to go out there and investigate it for you. So what you want to do now is actually track down the botnet source code that's being used. And to do this, you're going to want to use your list of source IP addresses. The first thing you want to look for is a network that you already have a contact with. You know, if you have a friend at a network, it's going to be much easier to work with them than anybody else. If you don't see anyone in there that you recognize, you're going to want to look for either a reputable U.S. hosting company or a reputable EU hosting company. You're going to need to approach the network through the abuse contact. Give them as much information as possible on how the machine, you know, on how the host that you picked out, how it's involved in the attack, how you determined that it was involved in the attack. You're going to want to be really calm, patient, and persistent, because a lot of abuse contacts, they're initially answered by NOC people, and NOC personnel aren't going to necessarily know what you're talking about. So it might take you a while to work your way to an engineer who's actually willing to help you. Once you've actually found an engineer who does understand what you're talking about and who is willing to help you, you obviously want to be, you know, really nice to them. The information you're going to try to get off the infected machine, netstat, TCP dumps, who's currently logged in, web logs, access logs. Of course, whether or not you get this information is really dependent on the hosting facility's policy and the owner of the machine. But getting this information isn't necessarily critical. Your goal here is to actually find the source code. So your key thing is just to provide help and support to whatever engineer you're working with to find that source code on the machine. This process can take anywhere from hours to weeks, literally. And even at Prolexic, I mean, we have a huge contact list established just for this purpose, and sometimes it's still difficult even for us to do it. So obviously, once you actually get the source code, the botnet source code, you want to save this. Oh, and one of the things I forgot to mention earlier that's very, very critical is you really need to save all of your information to a central location. In the early days of Prolexic, we didn't have a central repository for all of our information that we collected, and as a side effect of that, some of the early data on the first attacks we got is lost and we can't ever get it back. So don't make that same mistake. Everything you get, put it in a central spot and keep it there, because especially under a stressful situation, things get lost, you'll never find them again. Okay, so now that you have the source code, you're going to want to examine the source code. Obviously, scripts are the easiest. You look at them, you know what's going on. However, most bot code is compiled code, and so it's not that easy. So you're going to want to unpack the EXE, run strings on it. Usually what you get out is a lot of gibberish. You're like, what does this mean? So you look at it in context. Do VI the unpacked EXE. You go through what you're looking for is any sort of identifying markers as far as who wrote the code. A lot of times people will put their nicknames in there. They'll put group names. Sometimes they'll even put their real name. You never know. What you're ultimately looking for is the IP address and the port of the command and the control server. Usually it will be in there in plain text, so you want to get that out. The worst case scenario is that you can't find any information that you understand yet, And the reason why I say yet is that a lot of this information depends on context. And so just because you can't put it in the proper context right now doesn't mean you won't be able to later or won't be able to with some other piece of information that you get. So once you've actually looked at the source code, you want to write yourself kind of a nice little summary, pick out all the key information, and then you're going to want to save that to your central location along with the source code itself. Okay, so now that you actually have the IP address and port, hopefully, of the controlling server, you either got this from the source code, or you can also get it from the connection table of one of the infected host machines that's been attacking you. And what you're going to want to do is verify this. So that means you're either going to telnet to the IP port combination or connect with an IRC client to the command and control server. And I'm assuming that most of you know what an IRC server answers like, so you'll be able to recognize it. Now, the process for getting this IRC server shut down is very similar to the process that you took to locate or to get the information off your infected host. You're going to need to go through the abuse contact where it's hosted. You're going to need to be calm, patient, persistent again, explain the situation. It's going to take you a while to get to somebody who even knows what you're talking about. And even when you do get to somebody that you're talking about, most people are very reluctant to just disconnect a machine from their network based upon what you're saying, that, oh, this is controlling, a huge attack against me. Most people won't believe you. So if you haven't got law enforcement involved yet, now is the perfect time to do so, because they can often help you. FBI will get warrants to get machines shut down and seized, but this is something that it's not a quick process. FBI doesn't get warrants within an hour. This takes some time, so you have to be very patient. Now, I've mentioned kind of several times that abuse contacts are difficult to deal with, especially when it comes to DDoS. It's a slow process. People are very reluctant to believe what you have to say. And I think this raises a really good question of how to improve awareness of this in the community and how to get legitimate requests answered in a timely fashion or forwarded to someone who knows and can answer them. I don't have a good answer. I'm just throwing this out there as a question. Okay. All right, so for this next part, this is actually finding the attacker, the person who is responsible for maybe writing the code or at least launching the attack against you. And this is where I have to issue a big, huge disclaimer. If you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know how to hide your identity well, your location well, don't attempt this. Most attackers are angry ex-employees. They could be possibly affiliated with organized crime. Unless you really know how to hide who you are, don't go after them. If they find out who you are, you're just as likely, you're totally likely to have them turn on you. And that won't be a pleasant thing. So first thing you want to do is, review all the information you have so far, kind of maybe get a feel for who this person is. So then you need to contact the attacker. And you usually do this on the IRC server that he's already sitting on. Any information that you get out of him, you obviously want to save and log all these conversations because they're going to be very useful for later. There's a big caveat here, though, and that's that any conversations that occur on a private IRC server aren't admissible in court usually. That's why if these conversations occur on a public IRC server, it's much for the better. It's really horrible to get to a point where you actually have somebody that you're going to persecute for one of these attacks, and your key evidence is something that can't even be used. So public server is good, private server is bad. Hopefully the information that the attacker gives to you will help you piece together the attack from a high level and kind of put together, what's going on, what his motivations are, perhaps where he is in the world. However, this really isn't very easy. Most attackers are highly motivated and highly skilled individuals. It's usually a matter of waiting for them to slip up. All right, so I've been talking about this whole time resources you can go to either with law enforcement or resources in the community. Here are the resources that I am referring to. Your local FBI field office. Most of them will have a division of cybercrime. Those that don't will refer you to the next largest city that does have a division of cybercrime. Department of Homeland Security, I really haven't worked with them much, so I can't give you my input. I just know that they do handle cases like this. CERT, You can certainly send your information to them. I've never actually received any help from them, but you can send it to them. The guys at Cymru are absolutely great. If they have the time and the means, they will absolutely help you. They will help you to identify types of attacks. If they have it even within their power, they will help you to mitigate them. If you're in Europe, the NHTCU has a cybercrime division, and I think that that's now been changed to where cybercrime actually resides in the local field offices like it does with FBI. One of the resources that I find most helpful is the local U.S. Secret Service. They're some of my favorite to work with on this. They have a division of electronic crimes, and yes, your local U.S. Secret Service office does have this. And then a new resource that the engineers at Prolexic are working at putting together is DDoSDB.org. And what's going to be on there is how to identify or recognize, different types of attacks, basic descriptions, what is DDoS. All my notes and this presentation from today will be on there. And hopefully soon we'll either get to release part or all of our internal attack database to the public. And I'm hoping that this will encourage other people to put their attack information there so we can kind of build a way to identify or profile botnets. And hopefully it will become a central repository for that kind of information. All right, now to kind of go through how this whole data collection forensic process works, I want to go through two case studies with you. The first one is a success story, and it involves the tracking of an attack series named X3M1ST or EXE. He was responsible for hundreds of extortion-based DDoS attacks. We documented all the information on him, tracked him for months. It eventually led to a successful arrest. Here's kind of a high overview of how the attack functioned. The attacker basically hid behind 4 levels of hacked servers to conceal his identity. The botnet was comprised of, a mix of general machines on the internet exploited by a variety of different methods, and obviously all malicious traffic was then directed at the current attack target. One of my coworkers was actually the tracker on this case, and EXE and his group only talked on private IRC servers, so you can see the problem here. None of the information we collected from them could ever be used to build a case against them. However, one day EXE made the mistake of connecting from his home computer under a domain actually registered to his real name at his real address. This was the slip-up we had been waiting for, so as soon as we got this, turned it over to the NHTCU, and that information, combined with a lot of information from other sources, led to a successful arrest just a few months later. So that is actually EXE, aka Ivan, being arrested in Russia. The next attack is a lot more interesting, in my opinion. And these series of attacks are named Pikuglima or ABBA, and you can really pronounce that however you want. It's not a real word. The interesting thing about this attack is that for its zombies, the infected hosts, this guy targeted Linux machines, specifically Red Hat Linux machines. And the difference between the Linux machines like this and kind of your average home user boxes that they sit on much higher bandwidth connections. The exploit that he used to infect these machines was mostly a common cross-site scripting vulnerability in PHP, in which you take the query string and you insert it right as an include file or execute it on the machine without doing any validity checking. But he was pretty crafty. He also used MySQL injection. He used holes in popular control panel code like cPanel and holes in a lot of the popular shopping carts to recruit machines. He also actively browsed the ODay lists, and he could adapt his code, basically what I saw, in under an hour for any new exploits. So he was a creative little guy. It's the same basic scenario here. He hid himself behind multiple layers, big botnet, attacks a single target. Everybody kind of knows how that works. The result of having such a powerful botnet was a SYN flood that spiked over 10 gigabits per second. Problem with a flood like this is that it knocked a lot of our upstream providers offline and also got us null routed outbound on a lot of the other larger telco networks just due to the amount of outbound traffic to our network. People having so many infected hosts on their network that it causes an outbound flood for them, which is always fun. On this particular case, I was the tracker. I had a lot of interesting conversations with this guy. I learned that he was being paid by an employer he wouldn't mention to me. And I learned that he had done this actually multiple times before for other employers. And unfortunately, what happened with this guy was that he eventually disappeared. But before that, I was able to also get out of him that English was his second language. He always logged in from hacked university servers. And also that he was attacking other sites, about 6 other sites that happened to sell the same product as the client that we were protecting. And when I actually went to our clients and told them this, not only were they not surprised, but they said it made perfect sense. They'd actually been threatened via the phone, over phone several times by a competitor trying to force them out of business. So once we kind of put all this together, that and the fact that this attack occurred right before Christmas and over Christmas, which is the busiest time for any retailer. So this kind of goes to put together the picture that this was corporate sabotage. I spoke with Abba for weeks. He never really gave up anything about himself. This guy was probably one of the most professional I've ever dealt with, which would go with the fact that he said that he's been doing this for quite a while. It became really difficult to obtain further information because he was always logged in from either China or Japan. Those countries can be a bit difficult to work with, especially China. So the end result was that I turned over all the information to the FBI and let them pursue the case further. So everything that I brought up today, I think, leaves us some big kind of issues to address in the community. And that's better abuse contacts, maybe one specifically for DDoS. We also don't have any centralized repository specifically for DDoS profiling like we do for worms and viruses. I mean, I'm hoping DDoSDB.org might head in this direction. I don't know. I realize that this information gathering is extremely intensive, but it's very worth it, not only to you, but to others. Also, no running IP space due to large amounts of outbound malicious traffic is not a good option anymore. If this happens, probably your network needs to be cleaned up a little bit. There's 2 other pleas I want to make here. One is that you shut down open recursive DNS servers on your network. The other is that everybody out there instigates some stricter spoofing rules. Bottom line is that DDoS is everybody's problem, so I want to get everyone involved in solving it. And that's it, so thank you very much for listening.
Matt Petak, Yahoo. One tip for people, if you are likely to be a victim of DDoS attacks, it's very useful to have a DSL connection or some other connection totally unrelated to your normal upstreams that you can use for sending email, looking up who is records, doing other contacting, even just DNS lookups, because it really, really sucks when you can't get to the rest of the internet and you're trying to debug these things.
Well said.
Hi, Mike Hughes, Links. Comment about the NHTCU and what's happened to the NHTCU. They've been rolled up into an organization called the Serious Organized Crimes Agency, or SOCA. And there's a genuine concern in the UK, and the NHTCU have been really helpful in the past, but there's a genuine concern that some of the e-crime stuff is going to fall down the gap, because it's like, well, level 1 sort of petty crime, go to your local plod. SOCA is far more interested in sort of level 3 organized crime, drug rackets and things like that, and sort of extortion and hacking and DDoS is like kind of, well, it's not as bad as the drug guys, so it kind of falls down the gap. It's like a second-rate thing for them, and there's a genuine concern about that. So I think that's a case of watch this space with that, because certainly the NHTCU were approachable and had a lot of industry outreach, whereas sort of SOCA are far more sort of arm's reach, dark and shady types, if I can say that about law enforcement. Okay.
Hi, Bill Woodcock. I wonder if you could spend a little bit more time on the issue of the public versus private IRC servers and what, obviously, we know the technical distinction, but what the legal distinction is between public and private there, and why conversations that you yourself are involved in are not admissible, if that's what you were saying?
Yes. Okay, so the distinction between public and private IRC server, right? A private IRC server is any IRC server that's run by a group or individual that is not publicly accessible, that's restricted only to a group. I'm not sure why this definition exists, but it does. Private IRC server is also, if it's running on a hacked machine, that's a private IRC server. It's a box owned by somebody else. I'm not exactly sure why, technically, according to the law, this is not allowed. This is what, I've been told by the FBI, and I've also experienced this fact that some of my stuff won't be admitted into investigations because of this. A public IRC server is basically defined as an IRC server who anybody can connect to. And so that's, FNet, DALNet, any publicly accessible one. Those conversations are perfectly okay. I'm not sure why the ones on a private box are or aren't, but I just know that they.
Your affidavit regarding the contents of the conversation is admissible, though?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What you assert about the contents of the conversation is admissible, though?
You can, whatever you get from it, you can admit, but it's only hearsay. You can't, since you can't admit the actual conversation, it's not fact. It's just, if you learn something from it, it's hearsay and it can definitely help you, but it's just not actually admissible into court.
Anton Capella, 5/9's Data. I just have a question for you. What does Prolexic recommend when customers are attempting a bit of the forensics you talked about earlier, when it's likely that the tools you would use to kind of figure out what happened to the host, the tools themselves could be backdoored or exchanged for ones which hide the fact that anything happened? How does Prolexic, how do you recommend customers deal with that kind of stuff?
I guess I don't get your
Well, for example, you said like netstat output and that kind of stuff. And I've found that many machines we've dealt with are very well rooted, if you will. And they've even changed netstat or the output of such.
Oh, you mean like if somebody's actually rooted the machine and they're changing the data on it?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I guess I'm just hoping that whoever you're working with can kind of help you to determine, too, if the machine has been rooted like that.
Sure.
Chances are going to be dealing with, if I call you, I'm going to be dealing with you. And you're going to know. If we start looking at that box and, between the two of us, we ought to be figured out if it's been rooted.
Sure. I guess I'm thinking for like say co-location customers, people I don't have access to directly. Is there any kind of network level stuff you're trying or working with or doing?
Yeah, not really. That's where, like co-location clients and boxes you don't have access to, that's where it gets tricky. Your information is only as good as the source you're getting it from. So,
Sure.
Yeah, that's just, advise your clients on better security. That's all I can say.
Good, yeah.
I think we're already into the break. So just the last two questions, and I think these two guys, John's going to walk away. So one and one on the other side.
Eugene Kim, anti-TMCL. About the admissibility as evidence about conversations on some public servers, what if the server is located outside of the United States? Does it affect?
That's if the server's located outside the United States, I think it's fine as long as it's a publicly accessible server.
I see. And how about private conversation instead of some public conversation on some channel or something like that?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Private message, chat, whatever. As long as it's on a public IRC server, it's fine.
Thank you.
Hi, Louis Lee from Equinix. To address Tony's question, I would suggest maybe mirroring the switch port that the server is on. Then you would be able to capture all the traffic from a machine that you hope has not been hacked already.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect suggestion right there. So, yeah, perfect.
Okay, one last one. That's it.
Rob Seastrom, Clue Trust. Quick question. What is the incidence that you are seeing of both encrypted communications and multiple CNC servers distributed where if you take out one, everyone just talks to another one?
Oh, yeah, that's actually a huge disclaimer I forgot to issue about all of this. This is actually only, unfortunately, this information collection procedure is unfortunately only for the absolute easiest case scenario, and that's where you're dealing with an attack, a non-spoofed attack that is actually controlled by a centralized command and control server, whether redundant, distributed, or not. A lot of these attacks function both peer-to-peer and through proxy servers. In the case you run into one of those, you're going to have to go to an expert. There's basically nothing you can do yourself, or at least that I can tell you right now in 30 minutes.
I'd like to make a comment, and Stuart Phillips from New Metro. I worked on several of these cases. The one thing you talk about with private and public chat rooms.
Do you want to just ask me afterwards?
Okay, I just want to make a real fast comment.
There's also the security buff this afternoon, and this is the perfect place to continue discussions like this. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.